We'll hear now from Major General Matt Burr, Commander 2nd Australian Division, giving us an update, as we do have every year from the Commander of 2nd Division. Then we've got a short combined presentation from our three single service 1-stars. And at the end of that, we'll bring together a collective Q&A session, which will enable me, to pick up on a couple of questions that I left there from Major General Laidlaw's presentation, and then whatever else we get come in from everyone here and also from the online audience for and even though it's a combined presentation from our single service representatives, I know they're happy to take any questions that might come from a particular single service perspective as well. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Commander 2nd Australian Division. Great to have you with us, Matt, as always.
Hey, thanks very much, Mike. Hey, Mike, again, really grateful to be here today. I was counting actually, I've worked for and with you now on 3 separate occasions. I was going through the 4 Brigade Command experience, certainly as the task group commander whilst I was in Afghanistan, and now the opportunity to work with yourself as the National President of the DRA. Very grateful. So great to see you here. And thanks very much for that kind introduction. It's good to be here again. I've enjoyed coming to the Defence Reserves Association conference over the last decade, and I've always found them to be a great place to engage with serving and ex-serving reservists. I'm now privileged to address the conference as the Commander of Army's 2nd Australian Division. And, you know, before I start, I'll quickly acknowledge the other General in the room, Doug Laidlaw here, and certainly very grateful for all of the other presenters that have come before me here. And of course, all those serving ADF members and veterans, thank you for your service and your attendance here today as well. Today I'd like to divide my time between 2 topics that are important to me, and I think they're also important to yourself within the audience. Firstly, I'd like to talk about our division's preparation for operations, so indulge me a little bit there as I speak exclusively about the 2nd Division. On Talisman Sabre that was just completed on the 4th of August, and I'd also like to outline the division's preparedness challenges that might lie ahead. The second I'd like to address is the Defence Reserve Review and what it means for reservists across the country, and also importantly for those within the 2nd Division. So firstly, Exercise Talisman Sabre 2025. Look, I'm pleased to report the 2nd Division performed admirably on what I'm certain was one of the most complex, challenging and realistic coalition exercises that I've participated in across my 40 years of service. During Exercise Talisman Sabre, the 2nd Division deployed almost 2,000 soldiers into the Northern Territory and Western Australia to conduct protection operations primarily through Darwin and at RAF Base Tyndall and also at RAF Base Curtin. Exercise Talisman Sabre was the largest deployment of 2nd Division soldiers since the mid-90s. Furthermore, the 2nd Division during Talisman Sabre deployed over 300 vehicles, in which the vast majority were embarked on civilian contracted shipping from the Port of Melbourne and Port Kembla, and that sailed north to Darwin for operational use. The soldiers of the 2nd Australian Division conducted persistent security operations across 2,500 kilometres from Baroola in Arnhem Land to RAF Learmonth on the Exmouth Peninsula in Western Australia. The 2nd Australian Division soldiers, as Joint Task Group 629, enabled more than 2,000 air sorties through the provision of air-based protection operations and conducted more than 100 community patrols across all regions in which they operated, working with the local and state governments, ASIO, the Australian Border Force, the Australian Federal Police, the Australian Signals Directorate, the Northern Territory Police Force, the Western Australian Police Force, and as you heard earlier from General Laidlaw, we also did enhanced security cooperation and protection with the United States Coast Guard. The 2nd Australian soldiers, or the 2nd Australian Division soldiers, also deployed to Christmas Island as a security force for a combined United States and ADF rehearsal activity in which the RAF inserted a HIMARS as a further demonstration of Army's long-range fire capabilities. The 2nd Division soldiers provided ground security and support RAF of Air Force agile operations at Derby Airport, at Broome Airport, at Kununurra Airport, at RAF Learmonth. Additionally, the 2nd Division soldiers also supported the 1st Division with exercise control responsibilities at the Townsville Field Training Area, and the 2nd Division also supported Special Operations Command with opposing force soldiers and trades personnel into locations as far afield as Queensland and Papua New Guinea. The efforts of the 2nd Division during Exercise Talisman Sabre cannot be understated. The soldiers, mostly based out of Melbourne and Sydney from the 4th and 5th Brigade respectively, and that's not to diminish the great support from right across the division, but the main effort on this particular rehearsal activity was from the 4th and 5th Brigade, where they deployed 3,600 kilometres from the depths of an Australian winter into the dry and at times unrelenting heat of the Northern Territory and Western Australia, in which the vast majority of soldiers had actually never visited or exercised before. As the 2nd Division reconstitutes from Exercise Talisman Sabre, it's my headquarters that is now focused on the Homeland Defence Series for 2026, refining the Joint Task Forces 629 Defend Australia mission set with a keen eye on Austral Shield in July 2026, in which we plan to deploy more than 2,500 troops into Queensland, the Northern Territory and also Western Australia, focused on protection operations of critical infrastructure and military bases across all ADF domains. Again, the 2nd Division is delivering a focused, integrated force that is rehearsing its preparedness. All of these achievements are tied to an expanded rehearsal of the Division's Theatre Mission 1 Defend Australia, demonstrating the 2nd Division's crucial role in the National Defence Strategy, Concept Aspire, as well as delivering the goals that are set out for us in the Defence Strategic Review. The 2nd Division is a persistent presence amongst our community and across the entire nation. In 2025, the 2nd Division continues to be versatile in its employment, shifting quickly between domestic operations such as the Division's deployment into Operational Tropical Cyclone Alfred Assist, to a full mission rehearsal on Exercise Talisman Sabre to protect population centres and critical infrastructure. The Division delivers on its mission while providing value to government through relevant, dependable and highly usable forces for a modest investment. The 2nd Division is comparatively low cost and high impact for both the ADF and our nation. So I just want to share with you, and I had the opportunity a fair bit during the actual exercise, but I'll give you a soldier's perspective within the Division throughout Exercise Talisman Sabre. And it's in my experiences that big exercises like Talisman Sabre are often made up as small team experiences. I often find the best way to understand what's really happening on the ground is to engage directly with the soldiers and the junior leaders that are executing the task. I want to share with you the story of one young soldier, Lance Corporal Dylan McIntosh from the 5th 6th Royal Victoria Regiment. And I know I'm showing a little bit of bias here, so I apologise for those people that are in the know. As an Army reservist, early in his service career, participating in a major training activity such as Talisman Sabre was a long-term goal. Lance Corporal McIntosh had a clear pathway for him to prepare, and he was also able to participate in 4th Brigade's lead-up training, which involved exercises specifically designed to acclimatise and rehearse soldiers for tasks that they were expected to complete on Exercise Talisman Sabre. Lance Corporal McIntosh was confident that he was well prepared to deploy to the Northern Territory. However, as is often the case, there was a last-minute curveball. Thrust into the position of being a section commander when the incumbent had to withdraw, Dylan thought, how am I going to do this? I've never even delivered formal orders before. He tackled it in the only way he knew how, by asking plenty of questions and being well supported by his fellow reserve teammates. Whether it be NCOs, officers, or anyone with the experience he could find, Lance Corporal McIntosh was a sponge for knowledge, and he soaked up every bit of it. Those 2nd Division soldiers who had previously deployed on Rifle Company Butterworth were invaluable to his and his section's learning process as we adapt and share the lessons right across the mission set. Dylan was able to lead his small team through security patrols and asset protection in Darwin. He was exposed to force integration with the Northern Territory Police Force. He undertook security patrols within Darwin in full combat order. A highlight of his Talisman Sabre experience was leading his section within a company attack during an urban clearance activity at Robinson Barracks using Blue Bolt ammunition. Lance Corporal McIntosh wasn't just there for his soldiers on the battlefield, he was there away from it as well. As a true leader, Lance Corporal McIntosh shared with me the story when, late one night, he noticed that one of his diggers seemed slightly off. After having a quiet chat with this soldier, Lance Corporal McIntosh realised his defence awareness training was leading his actions. Those actions saw the affected soldier get the help that he needed that night, and that soldier was back in the team in the coming days. This small story amongst the high tempo of a major activity highlights the trust and positive leadership of a junior NCO such as Lance Corporal McIntosh, and the compassion and care amongst our teams. In addition, Lance Corporal McIntosh also tells me that he may not be the only member of his family deploying on the next iteration of Talisman Sabre. He says after hearing the stories that his wife is now also considering joining the Army Reserve as well. Who knows? Hey, so I can hope you can see that the life of a reserve soldier continues to be challenging. It's a great opportunity with world-class training. Reservists within the 2nd Division deploy with a clear purpose and role, and they deliver on the Division's commitments within the National Defence Strategy. But I do think we need to acknowledge that whilst the expectation of our reservists are high, the way we reward, support and enable them to serve our ADF and in their communities, families and employment need attention. Many of you know my story. I started my career in the regular army and for the last 25 odd years as a reservist. I've juggled a career within the Victorian Fire Service, responsibilities as a husband and a father of 2, and I certainly want to give a shout out here to the partners and families of our reservists. You're a key member of the team that support reserve service and I thank you for it. I'm also a member of the Lycwood community where we've resided for years. Over that 25 years juggling full-time civilian employment and Army Reserve commitments at the same time as volunteering at school community activities, kids basketball coaching and the like, I know and I live the reserve dream. So when I say it's time to rethink and modernise our approach to reserve service, I hope you understand it comes from a place of personal experience. Like General Doug Laidlaw, and thank you again for your presentation earlier, who led the Reserve Strategic Review, I want to underline that this work was done by leaders with skin in the game. The review was not an academic exercise at arm's length or detached. Our aim is to make reserve service easier across the services, more rewarding and better supported, and, most importantly, more lethal in the eyes of our adversaries. Reservists serve to deliver a military effect. That is our purpose. So the Defence Reserve Review, and what do I take about it? So it's important to say that the review wasn't focused on the 2nd Division. So I appreciate the stage that I'm getting right now and it's very focused on the 2nd Division. But the Reserve was not even focused on the Army Reserve. Many of its recommendations, you'll know, relate to the other services and the new domains of cyber and space, as we heard earlier. In a sense, the Army Reservist is a proven and dependable provider in the Army Reserve, in the ADF Reserve system. Those Army Reservists in the room should be proud of that. Let me talk about the elements of the review that impact the Army and the 2nd Division more directly. I take away key insights and recommendations from the review. First, the reserve force level framework that was explained and given a little bit of airtime today. It's enabled CIRCAT 4 contracts. That's a good thing within the division. In essence, it's a way to provide small bonuses to those reservists able to commit to higher readiness and guaranteed availability. On the ground, it looks like a $5,000 tax-free bonus paid annually in return for assured readiness and availability for deployment, say in response to flood or a bushfire, through to tasks of greatest consequence within conflict. The second one that I'll take away from the reserve review are faster entry pathways and faster initial training. The Defence Force recruiting is getting faster and will continue to improve. So in anticipation of that, we've streamlined and accelerated recruit and junior officer initial training, and thank you to the team at 8 Brigade that we're working with in partnership for that. Now, 22 days at Kapooka for soldiers and officers, now 15 weeks, typically spread over 2-week blocks. We want soldiers trained and in units, not stuck in training pipelines. And any assistance that the Reserve Strategic Review brings to that is an improvement from my perspective. Conditions of service. Whilst the 2nd Division doesn't own this recommendation, I know that the 2nd Division's reservists want to see our reward and recognition systems improve, and we've spoken a little bit about that today. I certainly do. It cannot be right for a 6-hour shift in a fast food restaurant effectively pays 30% more than a 6 a.m. first parade to an 8 p.m. knockoff at a reserve depot. We can do better. It's not just pay, it's flexibility. Enabling reservists to package their remuneration, such as tax-free pay, HECS repayment, or as family health care, or even as superannuation contribution. To me, that's low cost to defence and it's high value to reservists. I'm advocating for a fairer reward and also flexibility. It's that flexibility and option of choice that's going to be what will attract and also, most importantly, retain our talented reservists within the 2nd Division. None of this is to say that I'm not interested in cyber and space, in industry partnerships, or workforce management recommendations of the review that are highlighted in the implementation that General Laidlaw spoke to earlier. Of course I am. I'm simply emphasising the elements that would matter most to an operational division such as the 2nd Division soldiers. It's important to say that much of the heavy lifting is still ahead of us with respect to the review. Recommendations to government is progress, implementation is impact. I know that I and my team are working closely with General Laidlaw and those groups tasked with the implementation to bring effect to the ideas of the review. Operational preparedness will always be my priority, but the implementation of the review is close behind, and it's also inextricably linked to the division's operational preparedness. Finally, can I make the observation about the condition of the reservist? I've seen a lot over my time, and it's not always easy to be a reservist. Not always been popular at your civilian workplace, and potentially not at home either. But what I do know, now more than ever, is that it's easy for the 2nd Division's reservists to see their operational purpose. The 2nd Division soldiers have resourcing and opportunities such as the domestic response tasking, rifle company Butterworth and Op Resolute deployments, and training for large-scale combat operations across Northern Australia. Today, more than ever, I certainly believe that reserve service matters for our Army, for our ADF, and also our nation. Real missions that matter to our communities, which will attract the attention of our adversaries. I'm proud, and I hope you're proud, of the reservists that serve today. Hey, thank you, and I'd welcome any questions.
We might, General, with your indulgence, just get the team, the 3 service reps to speak first, and then we'll do a generic collective Q&A session.
No problems. I'll wait then.
Wait.
All right, good on you.
Yep. Okay. So we've got now the ability to hear from the 3 service representatives who are doing a combined presentation, as I understand it. So Commodore Ryan Gaskin, Brigadier Michelle Campbell, and Air Commodore Greg Frasina. So thanks very much. Then we'll go to Q&A.
Thanks, Mike.
G'day. In the spirit of service integration, we've got a preso from the three of us. So I will start off. Okay, I have 3 updates for you. The first one is the support to the strategic review in implementation. So Army is working with Navy and Air Force in their ab initio pathway entry. And with that comes a FIC analysis. You know, where are these trainees going to be? So we're also working with Aaron Hassel and Forces Command. As many of you know, there's a network of university regiments and depots out there in every capital city. So from a FIC perspective, to have a multi-domain element in the university regiments is the spirit of the integrated and focused force. So in principle, obviously Army agrees with that. That's the right way to go, but that comes at a cost. So we're working with Air Force and Navy to understand what that cost is. And the concept of software as a service, I'm pretty sure everyone understands that. This is like FIC as a service, you know, a user pays. So we're working through those in the planning process. The next one is the total workforce system, the HR strategic dashboard. So we heard this morning about the support of data. This is live on the DPN. I'm sure everyone has seen that on the Total Workforce System hub. Have a play with it. It's a thematic and a strategic dashboard that can identify patterns. And we can understand from a reserve workforce perspective at the highest level what those patterns are, where people are parading, and you know, how they're being used. So that's supporting a number of initiatives across Army. And the last one is international engagement. So we've got to be on par with our peers and our allies. So in June, I was over in London with the Combined Army Reserve Forum. And that was very much a NATO and Europe focus. Remember back in June, that was the UK government had come in, the strategic review into defence there had just dropped the week before, and they were about to go to the NATO summit. So everyone was talking about their 3% of GDP spend on defence. So it was quite on point that the topic for CARF was mobilisation. So the Five Eyes community have very similar constraints and challenges. The exemplar from Australia is our total workforce system, and the other Army reserves are looking at that and how they can implement total workforce system. An adjunct with the UK, they're looking at also industry and their civil service as service categories. Now that's just a thinking at the moment. How they actually do that, or if they do that, time will tell. Moving to the Association of United States Army, USAR, and the Allied Army Reserve Roundtable, A2R2, will be done at the same time, and that'll be in Washington. And their focus will be around the Indo-Pacific. So specifically, what are the warfighting capabilities required from an allied perspective and integrated perspective to conduct combat operations in the Indo-Pacific? There's some talk about the Military Reserve Exchange Program, the MREP, as a mechanism to do some training in that area. But of course, that costs money, so we'll see. The agenda for that is quite fluid, so we'll keep you posted. I'm sure my successor, soon to be Brigadier Kersley, will give you an update next year. But that's all I've got. Over to Ryan.
Thanks, Michelle, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure for me to be here. Ryan Gaskin, Director General Navy People. Unlike Michelle and Fritz, I'm a full-time officer, but I am responsible for the total workforce system, not only as DGNP working for CPERS inside of Military Personnel Division, but also as Navy's N1, responsible to and responsive to DCN and the Chief of Navy. I have 2 lines of reporting and responsibility. Yeah, it's a hell of a ride. So look, this afternoon I just wanted to give you a very quick update. I've only got a few dot points. I'm probably like my colleagues, I'm interested in getting to the Q&A section. Really for Navy and like the other services, the 2024 Strategic Review of the Reserves will really adapt structure, shape and role and leverage the reserve workforce to deliver operational capability across the maritime domain. The Navy Reserve workforce currently comprises approximately 6,500 people, of which about 1,800 are actively performing regular reserve service, and clearly we want to see that number rise. The Navy Reserve workforce principally comprises former full-time Navy personnel with a small cadre of reserve specialists in areas such as medical, legal and maritime trade. The review certainly has a clear objective to grow the reserve workforce, and it really requires Navy to establish accelerated and mid-career entry options for personnel that don't necessarily have prior service, so ab initio entry. In support of this objective, we've commenced development of a specialist capability officer with a specialist capability sailor under construction. So that's an exciting space which I'll touch on in a moment. So in terms of the points on the slide, the partnerships with industry, I just wanted to touch on a case study. It's a fairly recent success story where reservists are seen as an affordable way to access maritime expertise and mastery that reside within industry. And the best example and most recent one we have are tugboat masters and engineers. And we've partnered with Svitzer, who are renowned in the maritime industry and certainly in relation to tugboat driving. And we've created a mid-career entry channel whereby industry qualified tug masters and engineers actually come in and qualify as Navy reservists. And it's predominantly officers at the moment, but I think there's potential in the future to extend that to tugboat crews. And clearly there's a growing demand upon that expertise within Navy as we realise Submarine Rotational Force West in the not too distant future. And we're already seeing an increase in the visiting nuclear submarine program, and that's becoming a bit more of a regular drumbeat ahead of AUKUS delivering our first nuclear boats in the 2030s. So we have an active nuclear towage capability which has been delivered in quick time via these means, which is really exciting. In terms of the second point around maritime operational reserves, we're really focusing on form teams and capability bricks, not unlike what you've heard from 2nd Australian Div and also 8th Brigade. And we're looking predominantly at deployable maritime force protection in terms of port security, and I had a sidebar discussion over lunch about that very issue, but also expanded health effects, leveraging the Maritime Operational Health Unit and also through the major exercises such as Talisman Sabre and surging health support in the direction of Defence Force recruiting, which if you're tracking, there's a few challenges that we're facing in terms of getting the medical clearances through in order to get people from application through to enlistment. Specialist deployable engineering teams for surge maintenance, battle repair and port reconstruction, and obviously industry partnerships are crucial to those activities. It's inclusive of logistical support so that we can move equipment and people and resupply during critical surge periods. Forward operating bases and pre-landing forces in support of naval assets, and annual exercises, as we've just heard about, in order to train our people and ensure that reservists are operationally ready in simulated environments. And Talisman Sabre is a wonderful example of that. And I'll also advertise that next year is a Kakadu, exercise Kakadu year, again, up in the north. We need to leverage established and aspirational reserve networks and support bases through maritime trade operations, MOHU, which I've already touched on, regional reserve centres, 8th Brigade, and also specialists, interpreters and translators, which are going to be in increasing demand. Partnerships with industry, you're getting a bit of a repetitive theme there, and certainly with other defence and emergency support agencies in order to leverage military and civilian experience. And then the final point there around future workforce realisation, we need to be more agile in employment categories, and I touched on specialist capability sailors and officers. We need to incentivise their service and ensure that we're making use of not only the entire reserve workforce, and I said 6,500, but also those ab initio entries. And those avenues of entry should really be targeting mid-career entry. If you're not tracking, we have a workforce hollowness issue, certainly within the middle ranks, and that's not going to go away. That's an enduring issue, and mid-career entry is one means through which we can achieve or minimise that hollowness and address it. And mid-career entry premised on minimal viable training and a competitive employment offer. And I'm sure I'm not breaking anything new there to you. Routine commitment to assure individual and collective requirements at short notice in support of surge capacity as required, and industry partnerships and networks for cross-agency capability effects. In Navy, we're really looking to expand upon CERCAT 4. I mean, high-risk weather season is again an enduring activity. It's easier to talk about a low-risk weather season, I think, in the Australian context. So building out CERCAT 4 and CERCAT 5 conditions of service and promotion opportunities in particular within the reserve workforce are important aspects. New work groups, as I touched on, specialist capability sailor and specialist capability officer, exploiting industry-based avenues to direct recruit into Navy for specialist reserves in ship construction, in port services, research capabilities and test and evaluation, etc. And establishing charters with industry that, one, promote reserve service and deliver maritime capability, and two, ensure that industry-based employment policies do not penalise individuals undertaking reserve work, and employers are actually encouraged to offer reserve leave. And finally, differentiated employment offer, really the need to establish new avenues of entry, more flexible mid-year career entry with no penalty for prior service, and perhaps create the creation of opportunities for senior industry advisors to join the reserves as advisors and consultants, and perhaps creating a try before you buy option akin to the ADF gap year program. We could have a reserve gap year, and we could incentivise reserve service by student debt reduction through HECS or HELP, and by the use of completion bonuses. That's the end of my points. I'm going to hand over to Fritz, and then I think the plan is we're coming back to take questions and answers. I take it you want to see your slide.
No.
Oh, there we go. See, it's just on delay. There you go.
You get done.
Thanks.
Good afternoon, all. Greg Tresina. I'll remind you, as alluded to, I'm not the PERS side of the house from a reserve perspective. That's all managed by CPERS and DG PERS Air Force, and I merely look after advocation for Air Force across a whole bunch of committees, boards, etc. Things we're doing, though, we talked about implementation and getting the rubber to hit the road. This started out of my work with National Support Division and the introduction of how do we get direct entry back into reserves for Air Force. So a conversation with the Brigadier at 8th Brigade, and we thought about how do we get Army's FIC, utilising Army's FIC and all their utilities, etc., to help us build the Air Force squadrons, university squadrons of the past. I don't want to stop there, because I think we can also drag a lot of people into service via our TAFE colleges as well. And whether or not the Army provide the FIC, or potentially one day cadets provide the FIC, that we can utilise for us to have direct entry training across the nation, not just our capital cities, but also in the regions. Benefits for Air Force, though, obviously, we get the direct entry training. We have a home for our undergraduate program, so our students that are currently attending universities for doctors, etc. It gives us an opportunity, which I think is very important from a cadet perspective, for the ageing out of cadets. Where do I go next? If you want to stay in touch, here's a place where you can call home, whether that be a university or a TAFE, I don't care, but it gives you that opportunity to stay connected with defence. The other piece that we touched on this morning, and it goes all the way back to the Minister, was social licence. We've got to the point where we went to not wearing uniforms in public and the like. I'd like to see a costing done from a Air Force personnel attending university or a TAFE college 1 day a week wearing a uniform. And it brings back that, there they are in the Defence Force, undertaking study, etc., and brings back the social licence of what are we here for. So I'll see how that unfolds. As I say, work is continuing. I love Commander 8 Brigade here today, hearing the stories, because he's been a great supporter of the plan. The second point is about the adaptation plans that Air Force is undertaking at present. And as we move through a continuum of competition, crisis and conflict, what do our headquarters look like and where do we need to focus from an operational perspective? So if I look at the requirements from the theatre air control system, the TACS, and the regional air domain picture, a lot more focus will need to be placed on those and a lot more people will need to work there. So we're looking at adaptation plans for times of conflict and utilising the total workforce system, building something for MWD, the force designers, that they can put a structure for Air Force in place for times of conflict. And it will be based on the total workforce system positions identified as CERCAT 3, 5, 6 and 7, and how that work will then enable those systems to operate but also keep the headquarters as functioning. What it identified though is the lack of communication or the tools to communicate, particularly with our CERCAT 2 and CERCAT 3 members. So obviously if I identify a CERCAT 3 member to take up a position in time of conflict, I might want to ask them first. And so therefore I think we need to keep that communication open. How we do that through the CPERS system, we're in discussions with HRIS, that's the information systems people, of how we might automate that communication with our reserve forces. The third one up there is the Common Initial Employment Training. Air Force started this month our common training for officers and enlisted. So it's the 5-week course at present where we bring them in and they learn everything about the ADF and about Air Force. That's common to both officers and enlisted, and then they split and go their separate ways to OTS and off to Wagga. What I would like to see, I think from a futures perspective, is that common course can be delivered in the 8 Brigade construct so that we will have the ability to direct entry for officers and enlisted across the nation. It's also led to, and I'm glad it's been brought up across, I think it was in the cyber discussion with General Coyle, about the options to not deploy people that may be employable in the Department of Defence. So Air Force has also developed an employable / non-deployable initial military training course. And much to the chagrin of the Army, it doesn't involve shooting a weapon. I might let them smell some AVTR and fly on an aeroplane, but this is all about getting them into service, learning what it's about to be in the ADF, but not necessarily being deployable. So again, it's all trials that we're ready to run. With that, I will throw us all under the bus and say it's question time.
Thanks, Greg.
Thanks very much.
A round of applause, please, everyone, for our presenters, General Boyle and what I'll do, just to orchestrate this, please have a seat, Greg. I'm just going to revisit a couple of questions that were online previously, and if Josh has managed to save those for me, I'll bring those back up again. They were just a couple for General Laidlaw, and they will come online shortly. But let me just start then from the floor. And could you just please indicate who you'd like to direct the question to? Questions of our panel post-lunch.
Lieutenant Colonel Gordon, consultant physician in the Army Reserve. I like your idea of wearing uniforms on parade. When I was in the Melbourne University Regiment, it was the Vietnam War era and we weren't allowed to wear our uniform. But in the current era, some of us consultant physicians wear our uniform to the first day of any continuing medical education conference to show the flag and say that we really do have an active Army, Navy, Air Force enthusiastic reserve.
Right, thank you. Next question. And I've just retrieved those earlier questions, so I'll come to those in a moment.
I guess question for General Burr and Air Commodore Vizina ties together a bit. I understand some lessons learned from Talisman Sabre regarding Northern Australian Defence and the nuances between Second Division and some of the Air Force Sec 4 elements, C2 arrangements, etc. Bit of a challenge. Noting the reserve review looks at establishing, I think, 400 to 500 Air Force personnel, predominantly in CSG, to maybe augment Northern Australian Defence. Is all that being looped together, like lessons learned from Talisman, recommendations from the review, and what CSG and 2 Division and, I guess, Force Design think?
Sir, if I may first, I'm not sure I could say they've been tied together as yet, because I think it was done in isolation. So the 450 for Air Force, they have identified the flavour of the types of people they want, and they've also identified what area they want them to operate in and what year they want them brought in. So the 450 needs to be completed by 2030, thereabouts. So we've identified flavour, type, location, and the year that we want them. Now, hopefully that will tie in with what, hopefully, some deficiencies, if any, that 2 Brigade found. Sir.
Hey, thanks for that. Certainly 2 Brigades, the Army Health Brigade, don't confuse that with the mighty first, the 2nd Australian Division in that sense. But they do support us in what we do in our operational tasks. I think the question, so sorry, where was the question from? Thank you. So I think the question really is about an integrated focus force to a degree, and what military workforce design is meeting that particular operational demand. So to give clarity to it, certainly the 2nd Division force elements that we're providing protection for, certainly not from, but the current arrangements for the protection of those bases has a mix of the extant Sec 4 capabilities within Air Force, and then on this occasion had an integrated force and potentially some support from the 2nd Division. Certainly, absolutely, for a military effective protection on the base. Well, I think from a 2nd Division perspective, what we'd look at from an operational sense is, have we got the operational demand signal correct for the type of operational task that's being asked of that particular asset, whether it be physical terrain, critical infrastructure, or human terrain in population centres that the 2nd Division will be needed to be employed within in its versatile sense. So I don't believe, certainly in the forcing being right now, 100% where those assets meet the priority for apportionment out of the 2nd Division for support and reinforcement, there'll be that integrated force there. Does military workforce design need to further consider what that operational demand is for that defence asset? Absolutely, in how that would look. And, that potentially might not look apportionment out of the 2nd Division, going forward. It may well be that, the Sec 4 out of Air Force need to reconstitute in greater scale or have different capabilities there. Did I answer that or not really? Hey, good on you. Thank you.
Thanks.
I'll just do a truth as well, if I could, please, without attacking you, Fritz. Apologies. But yeah, I can tell you right now, when we talk about minimum viable training for Army soldiers, it is for the demand signal for them to be employed in conflict operations. So anything that we are doing in ab initio training for employment in Army and for the 2nd Division will involve, as a priority, Army combatives. So that will absolutely include shooting and lethality, survivability. And the rest of it absolutely can be spread across other operational demands where there needs to be speed to capability in defence. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks.
Ta.
Yeah. Cheers. Thanks, General. I might just clear the decks now of these other questions, if I may, and I'll take a punt at directing them as to where they should go. And Joe, I know you've got a question coming up. A couple of these, I might weave them together. I think they're both maritime questions, if I may. So one is, in maritime battle repair, Are we considering contractual obligations in Ford Battle Repair to avoid the risk of strike or withheld service by contractors? That's question 1. And the linked question, well, not really linked, but linked in the sense that it's maritime. Port defence was a Navy Reserve function until 1994. Are you suggesting it should be again, or should it be a joint effect?
Look, great questions. I'll answer the second one first. So, yes, I think a joint effect predominantly, because I'm not sure we're going to be able to muster the number of naval reservists initially to do that job by ourselves. And I think as part of the integrated force, I think that's a strong message to send. So, yet everything that's old is becoming new again, back to 1974. The first one was about
Maritime battle repair.
Battle repair.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a problem we're going to have to confront. I don't think, certainly from fighting a ship, we are very focused on that within fleet. But in terms of how we then leverage the total workforce to ensure that people are all capable of doing that in the moment of need, that probably needs to form part of the basis of that minimum viable training, so that people are going through combat survivability and battle damage repair training on a regular basis, because it is a perishable skill.
Yeah.
I hope that addresses the question. And I think I'm getting another one.
Yes, I'll come to. I've got one more. Actually, one of them's already been answered. Thanks, Ryan. But yes, Joe.
Sorry, I'm right next door on top of you here. But Joe Lukaitis, I'm the Vice President Navy of the DRA. Couple of questions. If Navy, and this is great news today, that if Navy is going to build up the reserve force using the 450 positions, just a practical question of where reservists would be based. Is there any concept of thought of having bases in capital cities that might align with Army Reserve bases? Is there any thought into the homing of these reservists other than coming to Navy establishments?
Thanks, Joe. Look, not specific to the 450 necessarily, but we know inherently that we have a large reservist base of personnel, at least in southeast Queensland. I came from there. It's a nice place to be. So we need to leverage that. So I think instead of saying that we'd have them adjacent to major fleet bases or establishments, which would be really convenient, I think we need to make it easy to access. So the likes of HMAS Moreton, and I think it's the same in the west. Thankfully, we have Stirling in the west, but for a place like Moreton, I think it becomes a bit of a hub of activity, and we can really concentrate our effort there in terms of the ongoing individual and collective training requirements, shadow crewing, etc., etc. So my vision would be that we would utilise the majority of those positions in a place like Moreton.
And the other, sorry, this is tricky. The other one is just your rough estimate at 2030 is the date, but could you guesstimate a little bit, sort of 2026, 27, what sort of numbers are sort of feasible, workable? Yeah. Putting you on the spot a little bit.
Yeah, just a little. Look, no, not really. I mean, as I said, at the moment, we've got 6,500 reservists, of which we're utilising 1,800. There needs to be a major uplift, and we need to find ways of making the system more accessible. We need to incentivise reserve service more so than it is right now. It's a competitive labour market out there. We actually need a bit of a strategic shock and a bit of an awakening that the world has changed and we need to be better prepared for what's coming. So I think all of that is starting to build into a more national narrative, and I think there is a greater awareness. We're certainly aware of the threat. It's just the reality of how soon. So look, there's a lot of work to be done. So estimating, what those milestone numbers might look like on the run down to 2030 is hard for me to do on a Saturday afternoon. But we need to uplift, and there's no time to wait. Okay, so we've got to get after it now. And as I've articulated in the brief, there's a lot of work. There's a long shopping list of things from a maritime domain perspective that we need to get after.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks, Ryan. I've got one more question here, but just before I turn to that, I think the DRA's position is that when we get after some of these accelerated entry pathways, service agnostic pathways to get into uniform in some form in a faster way than has been perhaps traditionally the case, there's then a compelling case to take to government by Defence to have a campaign that is generic across Defence, talking about our strategic circumstances in a realistic way, how there's the opportunity to serve, it won't take that long to get into uniform, there's a range of options of things that you can do once you get there, and this is something that all Australians need to consider if they're eligible in terms of serving their country. And I think we just need to get back on the front foot in terms of a patriotic, pro-service, strategic circumstances are now, and we need people to serve. It's just me. It seems so self-evident. I can't imagine anybody would, No, absolutely, no one's disagreeing. One question I think for General Doug. This was an LOE 6 one from prior to lunch. Have we looked at contractual arrangements under LOE 6 so as to provide for equipment support in forward areas from contractors in uniform?
That was an online question? Or?
Yeah, that was an online
Okay.
one. Yeah.
Look, I think some of those questions which are really probably going to be in the remit of the National Support Division related to mobilisation and how we leverage the national support base, that's really where that work is going to be done. We've pointed to it in the reserve review, and those recs are directly related to it. I talk frequently with General Jason Walker, who's charged with that responsibility. I'm very keen to represent, I guess, the workforce component side of that engagement, so looking at the human beings. He comes from a logistics side of it, so he's also interested in not only platforms but supply chain security and infrastructure and those sort of things. But it's the totality of all of those fundamental inputs that are really going to be that draw on the national support base, and we need to be far more advanced in our arrangements and our engagements than we presently are, and that's what that rec points to.
Thanks. Any other questions from the floor? I'll just... we had one around cyber, but I'm sure that Lieutenant General Coyle adequately answered that. Sir.
I'd like to ask Air Commodore Officer the concept that the Navy has put forward of shadow crewing. Are we looking at some form that might take in the Air Force?
No. The way our squadrons are structured, I don't think we'll go down that pathway. It'll be a case of refilling squadrons as either people or the platforms pass. And I can't see us actually putting up squadrons, shadow squadrons at all. Thanks.
Our Deputy National President, Ian Flouth. Ian. Push it up.
Thanks, man. This one's primarily for Navy and Air Force, and I've asked this question a number of for in the past, and I still haven't got a reasonable answer. Have Navy and Air Force given serious consideration to the situation where Navy deploys to the north, or the fleet deploys, and you've got Fleet Base East, Fleet Base West, and in the future perhaps the submarine base down around Jervis Bay. And Air Force deploys to the north, to the forward bases in the north. In this situation, have you given any serious consideration as to who defends and protects Fleet Base East, Fleet Base West, and the submarine base? And in your case, Air Force Richmond, Williamtown, Amberley. Well, Edinburgh, yes, all right, let me put Edinburgh in there as well. Has any serious thought been given to how you defend and protect these facilities.
Do you want to go? I'll go first. I'm going to call 2Div. And having said that, though, it was a decision made many years ago. I believe Army were on the hook to protect bases, and that was many, many, many years ago. And I think there was a decision made about people, positions, dollars, etc., and Army were taken off the hook essentially to protect the bases. Would you agree?
Army's not on the hook to protect the base.
Correct. Yeah, and a long time ago they were, and yes, we haven't fixed that problem. The 450 that we talked about, the flavours that we want, that is about agile basing. It's not necessarily about the total protection, right? And the numbers you're talking about potentially are huge. And I'd say not within budget at the moment. Does that make sense? So, yes, we know they need to be protected. Do we have the people to do that yet? I don't think so. And what does that look like in the future? Who knows? I'm sure it does. But there's also agile basing as well. What do you need to protect if you're not there? Pardon?
Okay, from a Navy perspective, if we sail the fleet north, which ideally in conflict our ships aren't sitting alongside, so they should be at sea, and that gives us that agility that Fritz was talking about. It also takes the focus away from the bases, and fortunately most of our bases are southern, so someone's got to come a long way to come and interfere with them. I'd also say that just because all our ships are at sea doesn't mean to say all of our people are at sea, although there's a vast majority of them there at the moment, but workforce is on the rise. We're growing slowly but surely. As I said in my presentation, we're going to rely on port security support from the total workforce model. So we need to invest in that now, and I think we saw some stuff through the General's presentation of where reservists are being used in combat roles, holding weapons, sorry Fritz, to provide that sort of defence and forward defence. So yes, it's an issue for us. Have we solved it? No, but it's certainly on CN's radar. And again, you'll probably have to ask the same question again next year and make sure that we're still on track.
But I'm getting it's on CN's radar, it's on the Chief of Air Force radar.
And look, I would say in support of Submarine Rotational Force West, HMAS Stirling in particular is going to be upgraded like we've never seen before. If you've been to Faslane up in Scotland, it's a different world. And becoming a nuclear navy means that our security has a massive uplift. It's going to be a shock to the system. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
Hey, thanks very much, Ian. I know we had a quick discussion outside about this particular question, and there's a couple of things that come into it from a JDF 1690 perspective, which is the Joint Force Employer potentially for the protection of those bases. So I'll speak probably first through the lens of threat. So what are the protection on those bases right now? Is it commensurate to the threat for that base? So let's take that as correct, fit for purpose right now, maybe, yeah. And then effectively what I think you're alluding to is where the threat is higher, whether that be in crisis or conflict, where should the protection come for those bases after that? So absolutely that's a changed threat environment that would create a different operational demand for that. So what JDF 629 did during exercise Talisman Sabre and will continue to do, and what it's done in its recent iteration inside of Theatre Mission 1, is it has provided that protection for an increased threat environment. The force apportionment for that in an operational sense is always going to be limited, so people talk about availability of personnel. There is the capability gap that exists, so you know what you saw as a rehearsal or a demonstration at HMAS Coonawarra and the US Coast Guard partnership into JDF 629 is effectively showing where a capability gap with a higher threat environment might be able to be met by doing that. And so that's where that operational demand signal that I described earlier is. So, will it be met by, increased SEC4? Will it be met by, or what is the actual threat for that? Because it will be a multi-domain threat. So JDF 629 needs to be able to affect the multi-domain environment as well. So, it is a workforce issue, and there's absolutely historical lessons that can be taught for us there as far as those critical asset protection. But what we're doing in JDF 629 in these rehearsals is we're highlighting either where a capability gap is or a capability gap could be solved potentially, and then we'll feed that back into military workforce design, and then it competes in the IIP for where the priorities are for that capability going forward. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Microphone at the back, and while that microphone's en route, just one takeaway to this point, and I said I wouldn't quote from any articles that we've had printed recently, but we do touch on this in the ASPI article, and in broad terms what the DRA has said is that in the Navy and Air Force, the reserve element is mostly composed of ex-permanent personnel filling gaps in the full-time structure, together with some specialists in areas such as health. I think we're broadly right there. We go on to say the re-establishment of separate reserve units within the Navy and Air Force is sorely needed to protect base facilities, support other vital infrastructure for fleet assets and aircraft, and provide personnel to replace combat losses. So, I mean, that's our general position, broad though it is, in terms of that particular issue.
Hey, sir, Group Captain Pete Davis again. Look, just an answer to help Air Commodore Frasina's answer to the question about protection of our air bases. I had the, I suppose, the good luck of setting up our SEC4 squadrons when I was in the Permanent Forces OC95 wing. And the numbers that we required then basically gave us a footprint that could protect from within the base only, and probably sitting along the fence line but not outside the base. And it was highly dependent as soon as we started moving aircraft around the place, because we had to take security forces with them, to have a very significant reserve footprint, which we still do not have. So the answer to your question is no at the moment.
And with rifles? Corporal, hello.
Hi, good afternoon. Hi, I'm Corporal Lawrence. Majian, Laylor and Burr, please, sir. These are addressed to you. I've got two questions. So one is, as a firefighter, and you're providing a state operation, so sir, I think you'd pair well with that. What is out there for us to come across to the service when domestic response is out there? So when we're called upon, I'm a firefighter, I get called out, there's a conflict. Is there supports in place for us?
G'day. Thank you for the
Hi,
question. Look, there are protections. There is employer support payment. The support payment itself is not particularly useful to someone who works for another government agency. Yep. And whilst I'm an advocate for it continuing, there is a case to say that if you think of our reserve demographic as a layered cake, as I often describe it, and I think there's something like a third of our people are people just like yourself and work for another government agency, and within that, a great whack of them in another uniform, just like yourself, because of the familiarity, the synergies of different types of service. So that's kind of unsurprising. I think there's about a third of the people are in traditional employment in the private sector, and within that, some of them in big business. And big business not really interested in the support payment either. It costs them more in administration than the weekly wage is worth. But for the rest of the people in civilian employment, yes, that the support payment which is it's like $1,900 a week. It's the average wage. For a small to medium-sized business, probably does make a difference. For the self-employed, in the middle, so in the middle third, I think, are basically self-employed, unemployed, student, gig economy, multiple part-time jobs. For those people, it's really only the self-employed that it would be relevant. I talked about the protections. So there is the Defence Reserve Service Protection Act. It drawn, I think, for a peacetime paradigm. As you know, we've had some discussions over lunch. We've never once prosecuted anyone for breaching it, even though it is a crime to interfere with defence service, and whether that's a reservist training or deploying to operations. And that could be because we managed to negotiate an outcome in every other case, so that's why we haven't had to prosecute. Or it could be because people aren't really articulating the complaints to start with. But nevertheless, there's a system and we're reviewing that because I think it needs to be turned into something that's more fit for what you're talking about. An issue, though, that will arise that we have to confront around mobilisation is where should you serve, right? So something happens and depending on the nature of the crisis, if it's a COVID crisis and you're healthy, you probably need to stay where you are. If it's a crisis that involves it's an HADR and your civilian expertise are required, your national interest is probably you should stay where you are. The Protection Act says Defence has the trump card and wins every time, and I think that's one of the issues on mobilisation that we need to confront, mobilisation will sometimes see people in critical employment categories, just like what we worked out for World War II and all of that, where some people need to stay where they are. I'm sure General Burr will join with me in this, that in all of this, really, formal call-out under the Defence Act is actually our friend. It's, like when you're a reservist, it's like, please call me out because there's no ifs, no buts, I get to go, right? But I guess what it does allow us is operational planning where we design the force elements, knowing hopefully enough about the HR and workforce intelligence about our workforce, where we can design the draw on the community. And I was talking to one of our healthies today, around how we make sure that we don't wreck civilian capability in certain communities if we overdraw from them. So having the workforce intelligence to be able to do that, which is one of the non-published recommendations, allows us to make better decisions about that. So look, when you ask the question what supports are available, there's a range of supports that are available, some of whom are still applicable to your particular situation, but others clearly are not. And really, when we think about how we support our reservists, the reason why I'm really fighting hard to have the workforce intelligence is so that we can drive for support mechanisms that actually match or reflect the demographic of who our people are. Hope that answers them. Flick to General Burr. Yeah. Have a swing.
Please. Yeah, and absolutely that's been answered very exceptionally well there. Sorry, right up the back.
Hi, sir.
Hey, firstly, thank you for coming along to the annual conference. We need more serving reservists and ex-serving reservists such as yourself attending the conference, and to see a junior leader such as yourself here is a really good thing. So thank you. And also thank you, you're the third fiery that's in this room that I've met today, so well done on that. Hey, General Laidlaw is quite correct. So I'd frame it in the probably two items exactly the same. So, the work that you do is critical to national resilience. So it doesn't matter where and what you're doing right now, you do essential work for our communities, and then you're also critical as a part of the national resilience. So whether your essential work is within the fire service, the emergency services, or any other field, there will be an element of essential workers that in the context of what we need to employ and deploy. that we can't remove from the resilience of the nation. So that's where the challenge of your particular and our shared particular demands of reserve service are, and I spoke about those challenges first up. So as General Laidlaw said, call-out is a very good thing. It assures national resilience from my perspective, because in the context of that particular call-out, the government can then ensure that they exclude the essential elements of national resilience from that call-out. So the call-out is a really positive thing for communities, employers through the protection mechanisms that General Laidlaw spoke to, as well as provides employers, the assurance that call for doesn't necessarily provide them. So call out is a very good thing, and certainly call out for the 2nd Division gives us in our operational planning a high degree of assurance as well. The only person or the only one that should fear call out would be the adversary, is what I would suggest when we're conducting call out. So call out is a good thing. The last one is what General Laidlaw spoke to. So we do very broad planning considerations on what could be, what would be excluded under essential workers in the context of some of the planning that we do for Theatre Mission 1 Defend Australia. There is a large element of the workforce in those planning assumptions. The recommendation of a workforce intelligence tool for reservists, and there's a couple of lead traces on that already, that will help better inform that planning and give us greater fidelity there. But thank you for what you do.
Thanks, General.
Just got one more for Major Landlord, if that's okay. Sorry, sir.
Sure.
This is more, we're talking about recognition of training and employing, the reserve force.
Yep.
As a full-time member, corporals, we get a Cert 4 in leadership and management under the DRTO. Is that something that we can expect that our reservists can go ahead and take when they do their Sub 1 corporal? Is that something out there? I feel like if we can't give them that, we give them training and the qualification, it will help them equally in the civilian world as it does in defence.
Sure. Look, certainly within the context of understanding the employee value proposition, I expect that we'll go around that buoy another time. I do have some reservations about it. A lot of reservists will have a lot of certificates and things on the wall already. And I remember the pain when I was in my regimental career of, also being an RTO and having to have the right level of certified, people to be able to write those tickets. And my own personal view is that we need to focus on training, and training may not necessarily easily replicate and precisely the thing that gets you a tick in a box for another ticket. But having said that, I can envisage a better world of communication with employers where, you do a junior leaders course, and as long as you've ticked you're happy for engagement with your employer, we've worked out what a JLC looks like in civvy speak, right? And you get your interview with the platoon commander or whatever at the end of the course. You're happy for the report to go out to your civvy boss. Yeah, that's fine. Letter gets shot out to the civvy boss. Hey, Private Logs has just finished a JLC, did really well on the course. By way of comparison to civilian speak, he's qualified now in the same way as something like a Cert 4 in small team management or something, and he's demonstrated the following skills and attributes and passed with flying colours. Now, that wouldn't be that hard to do. We've got some privacy things to overcome. It requires some mapping of our training to civvy speak, and I think that level of support to our reservists would probably be more valuable than fighting to get the piece of paper, which comes with another whole bunch of costs around being an actual RTO to be able to do it. But look, that's my view. I think RSM might be busting to say something here. Can I hand over to you?
Can I just confirm that I understand your question? So you're telling me your Subject 1 for Sergeant in the CERCAT 5 space is not the same qualifications as a CERCAT 7? Is that what you're saying, under the RTO? Yep. Yep. Okay. Yep, so I'm going to take that offline. So the proficiencies for both the courses of CERCAT 5 and CERCAT 7, Subject 1s, are the same. So if you're getting something through an RTO for a Subject 1 Sergeant for the full-time and the proficiencies are the same for a part-time, then it should be the same result. So let me take that offline and speak with Forces Command, and I'll get back to you.